welcome back to the TTRPG Freelancer Mentorship podcast series. I am the host. I'm Crystal Mazur. This is our episode for the writing process. So, a brief overview of this series is that the goal is to help people who are interested in freelancing, who are curious about how freelancing works, who are struggling with parts of freelancing, to connect with established writers as well as newer writers to kind of help themselves get past that, learn more about that, and become a little bit more connected with the industry. So if you haven't seen the rest of our series, I highly suggest that you go check it out. We have Getting Started in Freelancing, freelance writer pay and negotiations, contracts, as well as several in-person convention recordings that I also have up from both Gen Con and GameholeCon. So please check those out. My guests today are Rick Heinz.
Hello.
And David Whitworth.
Hello.
All right, so we're going to move on to news. All right, so I'm going to have my guests kind of talk about some of the stuff that's coming up for them, where you can find them in person. And again, we'll kind of bounce back to this at the end of the podcast. So, Rick, why don't you start?
By the way, I love your sound effect that you made to transition over into news. That was epic. So for those of you who are listening who don't know, I'm Rick Heinz. I write sarcastic crap about the end of the world, novels, books, game lines. I've been freelancing forever. I'm usually at conventions. And I'm sure I'll talk throughout this entire process about all of the projects that I worked on. But throughout the year, I tend to go to about 20 to 30 conventions. Some of them I go do in artist alleys on my own. Some of them I'm invited as a guest out to the show. Some of the ones I'm as a guest at this year are Pensacon, Florida in February, Anime Milwaukee, C2E2, Anime Central. I'm going to be doing Dragon Con again this year, Salt Lake City Expo, Kineticon. Basically, if you go to my website at some point, or you follow me on Twitter when we get to that later, you can find me at a convention and you can nerd out with me and we can talk about various things. But my other major news that I have that I'm super excited about is I had the lovely opportunity to write the Crow Prayers of the Past, the official Crow RPG game system, with my story canon approved by James O'Barr and Pressman Films and things like that to tie the universe together. And it actually comes out in January. So I'm overhauling my convention display to finally be I am officially canon in the Crow universe. And if you know me as the goth kid from the 90s, this is a property that I cherish and love. So that's my news.
I didn't tell David about that. And just it was lovely to see that reaction.
As you say, goth kid from the 90s. That's goals right there.
Right. I'm gonna have to get every time I publish a book, I get a new tattoo. So I'm actually getting a tattoo of the crow symbol on, because that's okay, I could finally earn this. It's more than just a fandom that I grew up with as a kid.
Yeah, and actually working with James O'Barr as well on it. I imagine that is.
Yeah, it's with Evil Genius Game Systems. They picked up Pacific Rim. They picked up a few others, and when I saw that they had the Crow, I yeeted myself at them, and I did my treatment, and I threw it in, and I had to get all pitched and approved, and that's a great topic for later on, though. But it comes out in January. It's done. I'm going to get to sign the thing soon.
Adds to the list.
All right, David, what are some things that you have coming up?
Coming up, nothing really, unfortunately. Following that, I'm not really sure that I've got anything worthwhile saying, to be fair. So yeah, I've got nothing coming up. I've got a few ideas floating around that may take form next year. But we just finished the Kickstarter for Eye to the Void a couple of weeks ago. We're finishing off the writing for that, so the PDF for that should be out probably mid-January, we hope. I just need to finish the writing on it. And then there's obviously Paradigm Shift, which we did through Darker Days Radio, a God Machine Chronicle set in Manchester. So, which, as I was talking to Terry from the Mage podcast, I realised that I could steal some ideas from that and put it into Eye to the Void, which is quite fun. But yeah, that's pretty much all that's happened this year. There is something coming out next year. We're still waiting on the art for it, but we're still not officially kind of saying anything about it yet. So there is something coming, but I don't really have anything to say against someone who's just written for The Crow. So I'm going to shut up for the rest of this episode, mate.
No, trust me, you're fine. I still fanboy out about it, like internally myself, and to those who are just listening, you can't see on camera. I will flap my arms randomly whenever I even mention that I got a chance to do this.
Yes, yeah, it's honestly a joy talking to both of you because both of you get so excited about everything, and I love it.
I do have one thing which is quite fun to talk about. It's not RPG related, but my next
go ahead.
My next science paper is online. But it's about to go back to the referee for final edits, where I basically tell everybody that magnetic fields on a global scale don't do anything, which is quite controversial in astrophysics because everybody's like, yeah, they do lots of things, and I'm like, nah. So if you want to see me argue with science, I'm doing that at the moment.
Yes, I do, actually. I love random, weird, crazy science stuff. I follow, CERN and all of that stuff. I'm always, diving down into that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Science is always a good rabbit hole to fall down into, especially when you're arguing with science.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. We just had a conference here last week where there was a lot of people going, "You what?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's not what you think." Like, oh, can we work together? And I'm like, yes. Give me all the people and all the money. Give me a job. So,
All right, and then coming up for me, I have we just released our Spycraft Pit Primer a couple weeks ago, and as a reminder that we do have the Pit Primer holiday from last year, I think it was, or the year before, where you actually get to help save Christmas by holding Christmas back from spilling over into the other holidays.
Only that happened in real life.
You get to team up with things like Krampus and Very Lewd, and all of those fun deities to help save Christmas from itself. So check that out. You can get that at TTRPG. All right, so we're going to start onto our main topic. Okay, so I always like to kind of ground everybody into how you got into freelancing or your introduction to freelancing, to kind of give everybody a perspective as to how long you've been in the industry, where you come from in your background, because everybody that I have ever met in freelancing has an extremely different background when it comes to those things. So for instance, with me, I'm an educator by trade. And I have been an early educator, which is like preschool, for like 15 plus years. And one of the things that I love to do is I love to use role-playing games with preschoolers because their imaginations don't let them be held back. And it's always amazing to see what they come up with because it's nothing that I would have ever dreamed of as a writer to put into a book. And so coming from that, I started teaching and doing workshops with teachers on how to do this with their kids and their classes in a way that promotes learning and education. And I have a friend who had been in the industry for a very long time. He's been trying to get me to get into the industry, and I kept rebuking and pushing back and trying to avoid as much as possible for whatever reason. I can't even remember anymore. And then eventually he sat me down. He's like, I need you to write a Halloween scenario for kids using this open gaming license. It's First Fable. And you get to write however you choose to tell the story, as long as you're using those mechanics. And I am going to get it into a print book. I'm going to buy the art for it. And I am going to get it edited and everything like that. You don't have to worry about any of that. You just have to get me the words. Here's the date. You have 1 month. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I got it written, got it off to him, and he ended up having Aloy LaSanta do the layout for it. And that is how I met Aloy. Aloy hired me for working on Pip's System Core Book. And from there, Pip's System Core Book went on to win an Emmy in 2018. So after that, things just kind of steamrolled into something that I have never even thought would be possible. And that is how I got started in freelancing. So who would like to go first and tell their story?
Okay. Yeah, sure. My entrance into freelance writing is all the fault of Chris from Darker Days Radio. So when was it? Must have been just around the same time that Crystal joined Darker Days Radio, which would have been 4 or 5 years ago. I can't remember now. Time has no meaning. I work in millions of years. Time
You joined before I did.
I'm sure we joined around the same kind of time. But yeah, anyway, I joined Darker Days Radio when we started up the Dark Hammer series. And Chris was writing, what was it? What have we got? Hell Rides to Halt, the Warhammer scenario, and asked me to come in and help him write it. So that's where I started with the writing. We hadn't pitched it to Cubicle 7 at the time. We then did eventually pitch it to Cubicle 7. It got published, and it's now in about 4 different languages. It's a very, very popular Warhammer Fantasy RPG scenario. And then from there, I got to work on the Age of Sigmar roleplay, Soulbound. I've worked on the other one, Wrath and Glory. I've got a weird 40k folk horror vibe-esque scenario out for that. And then from there, I've just kind of done a lot of stuff through DriveThruRPG. I've done some stuff for Crystal for the PIP system. And I've just kind of kept it slowly ticking along over the last couple of years. And then this year, I had a brilliant idea. As I moved to Germany, I know I have a small publishing company in Manchester. 2 of my friends, I pitched them this wonderful idea that let's do a book on divination. And it went from going, yeah, we'll do a 10,000 word thing to it's now sitting around 33,000 words. It kind of snowballed because they let me do what I wanted to do. And that was just successfully funded on Kickstarter. So, and that's where I am at the moment with it. That's the very brief history of David and RPGs.
I'm a massive fan of Age of Sigmar, by the way. The lore behind that is really solid.
It's so good. The wonderful thing about it as well is it's so open. There is set places that have set lore, but the realms are so open you can kind of get away with doing.
I got some of the novels back here on my shelf, so I'm definitely in this. I don't even play the game; I just like the lore.
Soulbound is very much hero level gaming. So, Crystals, you've played it. You played a pink-haired Fire Slayer.
Yep.
You are very much a hero. You're not like gutter rats in Warhammer Fantasy. You are fully trained up heroes, appointed by the gods, going off and murdering everything. So,
badass.
Yeah, it's a great system. It's really simple as well.
So I guess on my end, I'm an electrician and an electrical engineer by day, project manager. I've been in the electrical industry since I was like 19 years old. I actually went to college to be a painter, to do like oil painting and things like that, and be like creative and artsy. And I was like, oh crap, I have to pay bills. I'm going to go get a day job as an electrician. And I actually fell down that rabbit hole, and I really, really enjoyed it. At some point, though, and this is important to some of these like later topics, me being a tradesman in Chicago allowed me to see elements of the city that nobody else really noticed. And I happen to have a very active imagination. And I was also a very big gamer at the time, like running and storytelling all of these World of Darkness games and things like that. And my first official freelance writing was they had these like mind's eye journal like little things for this like LARP, and I submitted stuff, and it was kind of like open submission. It was like the Wild West back in that day. Anybody could turn stuff in, and like there was like real no checks or balances, and you would just, hey, get published. But what happened is I was in my career as an estimator, electrical estimator at some point, and I was sitting, and I remember just sitting to myself in this office with these fluorescent lights above me and this like dim, 3000, 3000 Kelvin like lighting, this orangish light, bathing over me. Like my boss is smoking over a blueprint table. And I'm like, I need to do something else. And so I went home. NaNoWriMo happened to be involved for a challenge. And I quit storytelling LARPs. I had been storytelling LARPs and these massive games, like 600 people, large games at times. And I was like, okay, I need to take a break because this is like my life is I was like doing game running and then going to work. And it wasn't hitting for me. So I sat down and I wrote my first novel, The Seventh Age Dawn, which is sarcastic urban fantasy about the end of the world, set in Chicago, where a group of anarchists give magic to everybody and all of the consequences that happen with it. And I found that the writing process, me sitting there with headphones, listening to music, just cranking away, being lost in my own head, having my characters argue with themselves in your head, was a blast for me. And so I finished my novel, and a friend convinced me to go hire a developmental editor to take the novel to the next stage. And developmental editors are expensive, to go through a full length 140,000 word novel. And I was like, okay, well, fine, I'm going to go do this. I did it, and right after that, Nerdist and Geek and Sundry had a publishing contest where they picked the top 5 science fiction fantasy novels, and they offered them full publishing deals. On a lark, I tossed my novel in for the contest, and I won. I was one of the Nerdist picks. And then shortly right after that, Geek and Sundry is asking. They have this series with Matt Mercer, and he's passing the torch over to Satine Phoenix. And they actually ask Rob Weiland and Terry Licoro over at Geek and Sundry, were like, do we have any writers that know any other game system other than Dungeons and Dragons? And I'm like, yes, I know like 18, everything from like Rifts to all these other, even obscure systems and Deadlands. So I started doing the GM tips while I was working on novel series, and I started submitting to doing some freelance writing for other games because I would interview and cover as press, officially working for Nerdist and Geek and Sundry and Legendary at this point. I would cover everybody else's game lines for their Kickstarters, their news, what was happening. And there's about 4 to 5 years of articles for the GM Tip series that I had published up there on Nerdist. And that gave me a lot of opportunities into larger freelancing. But eventually, that novelist side of me wants to own the work that I do. And so I had the bright idea to work with the heavy metal band Dia Morte when they were in my kitchen, um, to say, you guys have like Cradle of Filth, Black Crown Initiate, Grave Shadow, like all your ensemble cast for your band. You have this beautiful orchestral soundtrack. I could turn this into, a small campaign for you guys as band merch, right? I was thinking just like you, David, this, 20,000 little supplement that they were just going to like, pay me for. 174,362 words later, the Red Opera was finished. And that was probably the largest book that I did. But then after that, it kind of snowballed like to going into writing director for another project, that is out there in the world, to freelancing for several other game companies and lines and doing storylines. I write less so much on the mechanics. I'm more of the plot person and the campaign writer. That's because I'm a novelist. I'm still working on my novels, and I'm still doing other elements, and I'm even now like doing I've gotten to the point where I'm opening up my own studio with a bunch of other people, Storytellers Forge Studios, and we actually get to let our creators own the rights to the projects that they do, and we have full distribution and publishing, and we get to do novel tie-ins. And this goes back to Crystal's earlier episode on negotiations and contracts, on like why the evolution of the studio Storytellers Forge came about in part from a lot of freelancer stories in the industry and even my own since 2018. So ultimately, that's how I got started. At this point, NaNoWriMo is no longer a contest for me. I just kind of passively am writing.
We're going to kind of go through as to the bare bones start of like the writing process, which is like, how do you get inspiration ideas? Where do you keep them? Do you keep them? How do you manage that? There was a story plot line that I wrote for Chicago by Night that came from a dream of mine. And that whole thing is actually all the way through. How it got broken up is it's actually tied throughout the entirety of Chicago by Night. And it ended up becoming bigger than what my dream was, but that's where it started from. A lot of the stuff that I have come from dreams, come from poems, come from me seeing a piece of art. When you're at Gamehole Con, I saw this gorgeous like fantasy art of this gigantic robot in a forest covered in moss, and there's like this knight on a horse, and they're reaching up to kind of touch each other, like in the chapel painting, David and God touching, like the fingers. They're kind of touching like
the Da
that.
Vinci painting, yes.
Yeah, the Da Vinci
the pull my
painting.
finger one, you know.
Yes, I can't think of the proper name of it right now, but like that evokes
Sistine Chapel.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but that painting evoked so much imagery for me and so much emotion that I was like, I want to write an entire campaign around that. I still haven't yet, but I bought the piece, and it's hanging up in my living room, and it's a gorgeous piece. I absolutely love it. But like, there's so much emotion in there, and so like that inspired me to do something, or even just to buy the piece. And then I have like a Trello board of like all of these ideas on what to do. So like how do each of you manage those type of things, or like get inspiration and draw inspiration from?
So it's a fun one on my end, because you have this annoying god that we cannot defeat called time. And
Yep.
as much as I would like to write everything down, so I get inspired from my real life. Like I said, one of the major scenes of my novel was I was demolishing the CTA closets in the deep tunnels of Chicago. So I'm way down beneath the city, and we have this whole like deep tunnel project, and I'm opening up like telephone closets. I'm just one after another, and it's like 11 o'clock in the day, but it's completely pitch black down here. And I shine my flashlight, and I open up a door, and I just feel this wave of water wash over me, and I'm like, fuck. Shine my flashlight down, and it's not a wave of water, it's a swarm of cockroaches that are now crawling all over me and up and inside, and like just scuttling all over me. I'm screaming like crazy, run up the freaking ladder. I have to drive home naked. I get home, I sit in front of my computer, and there's a scene of my novel where one of the characters gets surrounded by a demon made out of insects, and that's my therapy. And so a lot of urban exploration and random stuff that I find, I will be, in O'Hare Airport, or, when I travel overseas, anywhere I go, I get to pay attention to the back of house. And so I pay attention a lot to like the way lighting looks, who's really working back there, how do people get access to things, how reinforces. And since I love fantasy, I naturally just kind of like, ooh, wait, I could have this whole crazy action scene, you know, down here, or this creepy horror demonic scene with the drip of acidic water from, you know, these pipes. The problem is, I will also have other ideas when I'm working with other creatives, and there's this weird, you know, freaking feedback loop where we all have these really good ideas, and then we get really excited about a thing, and I'm like, awesome. I am gonna pitch for make this game line, and we could write a campaign about this, and we could write a campaign about this. And I've done ghost writing for other people. I've written other people's novels for them. I had to stop all of it because it is better for me to finish a project than it is to have all of these other little ones that I'm going on. So I let a lot of them go now, and I just like, okay, this, you know, I was like, oh, I now that I know how to pitch for studio IPs, and it's like, ooh, I could make a really badass game about this line, or I want to write a novel about that. Like getting a chance to even I got approved to write some Subnautica fiction, and because I had an idea just by playing the game, and I just blindly reached out, but I couldn't do it. Like I had other time commitments. The other way I get music and ideas is music. I listen to a crap ton of music, and I build soundtracks for all of my characters. I will sit there and just like a writing session sometimes for me on a Sunday might just be me going through YouTube and watching music videos and like working on an outline and just building out a Spotify playlist. To me, music is intertwined. I can't write without listening to music.
I'm very much the same way. I have to have something. But being a musician, I have to be very specific about what I'm listening to, because otherwise my brain will sit there and analyze it.
Well, so what's funny is I'm a metalhead, and I listen to a lot of language music in other languages that I can't understand. I'll listen to like metal pop, like weird J-pop, French pop, all these other languages specifically because when I'm writing, I don't care about the lyrics of the song. I don't hear them. All I hear is just like the emotions or the beats, and that helps me set up a tempo without having anything bleed over.
David, what about you?
Most of my ideas, I would say, jump around, like a bit like Rick there. It's like you've got this time to do, we've got this set period of time that we exist upon this planet, and you can't do everything at once. And I started off very much the same way. It's kind of like, oh, I've got this really cool idea, I want to do this, let's start this, let's start that, I've got about 10 unfinished projects at the moment. I take all of the ideas come from just existing, walking around, things that I like, nature, countries, cultures, and then just throwing them down onto a piece of paper. The problem with that is I get all excited, and then the new shiny comes along, and then I go for a walk through the woods, and I see these random painted eyes on a tree, and I'm like, that's a great idea for this game, and let's see if we can do some weird camping thing with haunted trees. Or I'll walk through a city at night, and I'll just see this flicker of a cat run through a dark alley, and I go, there's an idea there, and I'll jump from idea to idea. But yeah, it's I find, especially for the kind of style that I write, I am very much more of the I suppose the folk horror, the gothic horror style at the moment. Any form of dark horror, not your slashers. I'm not really into blood and guts, but they come from my own interests. So the whole idea of Eye to the Void was just like, divination is really cool, but it's also not what you think it is. And RPGs tend to do it very, very wrongly, and they tend to maybe take ideas they shouldn't take in. Shall we write something on this? Shall we make it more kind of influenced by the real world and not directly stolen from the real world? And then I actually had someone say, yes, let's do this. And that's when I settle on an idea. It's when I've got someone who is willing to work with me on it and actually get it through to the end. Otherwise, I just start an idea and then it never finishes. It took me God knows how long to write Paradigm Shift. I think that took 4 years to write, and it's only a 6,000 word scenario because I couldn't really settle on it, couldn't get it finished. So, but yeah, I jump around, like music as well. Music's a big one. I take ideas from everywhere and anywhere. That's pretty much it. I've not got as grander history or storytelling etiquette as you two. I'm the newbie here, so I'm probably going to be the quiet one.
No, you're doing great though, because I could picture everything that you talk about and like relay it back to myself. Even the walk in the woods of here's this new idea. And let me ask you a question, David.
Yeah.
All of your ideas, and this probably applies to Crystal, all of your ideas that you have, you like me both recognize that we have this limit of time. Even if you just start this idea and you put it there, do you find that like in the back of my brain, the fact that I had these ideas means that if I do find a project that something is going to be going to completion on, that I'm going to be putting that time and effort in, all of a sudden I got this wellspring of like, oh yeah, I remember this one thing that I have, boom, pull it down from like the memory banks and like find that it's perfect.
Yep.
So
very much so. If even if it's just like so I do this as well within my science writing. If I have an idea for a project, I will create a document and I'll just put a title or a sentence on that document. So it's already there, it's already started. So it's kind of like starting the project, but not really starting the project. But then there's something there that exists.
So that even when you just see the title of it, you remember, I got this thing.
Yeah. So if you're like, oh, I had this idea about something like this similar from a couple of months ago or a couple of years ago, is it there? And go into my Google Docs and go, oh, look, yes, I did. I was right. Or no, it's not. It is now.
I have that too. I have the Google Doc of here's a bunch of folders and files with some stuff saved in them for things that I would eventually like to do in the future.
Yep.
I have the same. I'm actually currently working on a community content project from someone who dared me to write something based off of the pun, because there's story hooks, right? But what about bloody hooks? And so I took that and ran with it, and that's my side project for when I'm not writing all of my other projects. But that's something I'm currently working on too, and that was something that like I had to get out of my brain. It was so dug in there that I was like, no, this actually has to happen, because I can see it, I can envision it, I can see the mechanics in my head, and it's not going to leave until it's on the page. Once it's on the page and I have it finished, I know that it's done. But until that point, it's going to be stuck there, and it's going to permeate everything until I get it out.
Yeah, there's something that I've started that keeps coming back into my mind. It's very, very subtle, but it always creeps back in every now and then when I'm halfway through something else. This one project keeps creeping into my mind, but it's one of those projects that when I sit down and write it, it's much like what just happened with my last one. It's going to go from this small idea, and it's going to snowball, and I know it is because of what it's going to be. So that I then stop myself from sitting down and doing it because I've got other things that I need to do at the moment, and it's a project that I really, really want to do, and I just like.
Yeah, I think that's where the experience of having completed a few projects really helps, because I know that like at this point, once you've done a few of them, you know that, hey, here's this fun idea of something that you would like to do, and if you can't envision how it ends or what it finally looks like at the end, that's when I will usually shelve it. Like, because I mean, I have this idea for an entire game called Echo Punk that we're going to do and start writing on sometime next year. And I already know exactly what Echo Punk looks like all the way through. And thus, okay, this is an idea. I could take this and run with it.
I have a couple of those, and often I kind of have a cheat. I get to use Pip Primer as kind of proving grounds for ideas. So like with the Pip Primer, we have a theme, and sometimes themes will get stuck in my head. The one that I'm working on right now, and I'm actually doing almost the entire design for it because I'm redesigning the entire mechanics for it, which is something that is hefty to do when you are not a writer familiar with mechanics, and we're going to get into that. but I'm doing essentially it's Honobono, which is like soft role play or gentle role playing. Think like Stardew Valley, Animal Crossing, that type of thing. Even like Cult of the Lamb, if you're like that's kind of what inspired it, because I love Cult of the Lamb. If you haven't played it, it's like Animal Crossing with ritual sacrifice. It's great.
Oh, I know. I'm waiting for somebody to buy it for me for Christmas. Everybody knows that that's a game that I would love, but I'm like, I'm not going to buy that one myself. So,
So yes, when you play it, you gotta let me know. But so it kind of inspired like a challenge for me, because I have played around with so many mechanics with Pip system, adding stuff to it. What can I take away now, but still make it feel like Pip? And so that's why, like, that's a huge project that I'm undertaking. It's going to be a small primer still, but the design mechanics of it are what's taking up the most time, because I have to pare stuff down to its base to make it still feel like Pip. And so I haven't put that on other writers, because I'm like, that's a hefty thing to do.
great,
So
great, great segue to your next topic, actually.
I know, right?
Right? Like you set that up.
I didn't. You guys led me there, but yes. So yes. So let's go on to the next topic, because I brought it up, which is mechanics writing versus like the fluff writing. And by fluff writing, I mean like the plot, the story, stuff that is not the crunchy bits that you have to roll or use some sort of mechanic on. And then I threw a novel writing there because I have Rick on. And I feel like it is a good way to kind of discuss, because a lot more people in the world are familiar with novels over the parts of role playing games. There are a lot more people in the world that read novels than role playing games. And so using that as a comparison for those two parts, I feel like would be beneficial for everybody, including all of the writers that are listening to this. So
In terms of like verses between them, you actually just said there's a lot more people that read novels than game books, and that's actually largely because of like Newdom and time and whatnot, but
yeah.
also game books mechanically. There are entire companies out there that make a point of writing almost no flavor or fluff and are just dry reads,
Yep.
and they're just very boring. You pick up a book, you look at it, you look at some pretty artwork, and maybe you have some stuff to reference, and then you go about your day, right? Because I'm a novel writer, I tend to write my game books with the story and the flavor. And actually, I'm going to talk about The Crow in this one. And the reason why is because it hits all 3 points. The first thing is when a game studio has a freelance contract and they have an IP, and the Pressman Films might want you to just write, give us the 1994 original movie where you're playing Eric Draven and you're going to go around, you're going to kill some revenge, and you're going to go. That's the end of the one-shot RPG, and you hit it. Give me a 35,000 word campaign that this takes part in. And so the novel writer in me instantly goes no. Right, it's already been done before, and that's where I think the from everybody I've worked with in the scene, from freelance and even talking to the authors, it's always somebody who's a novel writer that says, "Let's do something unique." I've never gotten that from anybody who's like if I hire a freelancer for a project to work on something, usually they're being given direction. They're being told, "Hey, we have this thing. We want you to do this." And as a freelancer, they don't really think of themselves as developers or content creators. And so they kind of just fall into what they're told. And this can lead to a book that is put together by 10 freelancers, very, very bland, as each of them just did what they were told with no connecting vision. So with The Crow, the first thing I said was, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to write an original story that ties all of the comics, the universes, everything together, because the comics are amazing. And there's so many more books out there than what people are familiar with the franchise. And the novels are also really good. And there's a way that we could do this, create a compelling plot line and let the characters still have diversity in every element. And that goes into fluff territory. So I've come up with an original story of this like arch villain who set this up that actually ties the all other stuff together. Now, fluff writing is how to make that pop, right? If you don't have fluff writing, um, your game line goes nowhere. Hey, I'm writing a D&D campaign. It's about clerics. I actually am. I'm actually working on the Black Ballad. It's my favorite thing, but that line just doesn't do anything. I'm writing the Black Ballad, the perfect adventure to run after you TPK your party, where your party will determine whether or not resurrection should even be allowed to exist in your world. And like through this like epic quest and that storyline and that fluff, and in The Crow, the fluff hook was, what if you had all of these tales of the Crow and people being reborn? What if they're always hyper violent, people die all of the time? What if the spirit of vengeance, the Crow, killed somebody who was an innocent, but somebody with enough means, wealth, and access that their sister started doing research and found out that people were coming back from the dead, and then is rich enough to start trying to arrange such situations to see if it can be repeated? And the players all play victims of tragedy that they then create themselves. And this, like a spider V, ties them all together, and then there's some moral choices that have to be made. That's pure fluff. That's the hook of the adventure of what makes it. Fluff can get in a novel. That entire hook, the whole novel could be fluff and world building and whatnot, but there's one person, maybe two people in a novel that are working on it, and it's you working very closely with your dev editor, and so you have total control. In a game book, fluff writing gets very, very difficult because you have multiple creators and multiple people. And so you almost need a stronger developmental editing team or a stronger person to help oversee that fluff is lore consistent all the way throughout. We know some famous games in the 90s, and I love my vampire to death, but I mean, the Dirty Secrets of the Black Hand isn't talked about for a reason, because it broke so many of uh, the elements, right? When you don't have that narrative check, your fluff writing is actually the most dangerous part of a game, because mechanics, most storytellers rip and throw the mechanics out of the game anyway to play for table tension. You know, storytellers don't. People running the game look at mechanics on the storyteller side, and they will gladly be like, "Okay, this doesn't make any sense. I'm just going to change it." You know, Rifts had terrible mechanical math. I mean, in like some of their giant robots, your cockfoot space was only like 2 feet. And it was like, who the hell are you having drive these mechs? But to like take that away and toss it. So in The Crow, we had fluff writing, and what Evil Geniuses did is they allowed me to just be in charge of the fluff. But I still had to do mechanics. Now, I didn't design the mechanic system for Modern D20. Chris Ramsley did. He's the other author on the Crow book. He created all the player classes, the different spirit types, all the, opening parts of crunch that players will use and storytellers will do, and, how the classes work and function. So that's where I had to go write in a game system that I am not familiar. The game system's not even out yet. It comes out in January at the same time with The Crow. I had to research like all of the beta notes, figure out what's going on, figure out how to, build these characters from scratch. And it is a very slow process to go down that level, to like study somebody else's work. And you do have to dedicate that time to it. Know that as you're a tabletop freelance writer, when you get asked to write mechanics, I am, as a writing director, going to expect you to do the research and read the prior elements and the bodies of work to know about the game system you're working in. And I understand that I might have a mechanics editor or another design team or consultants that are going to help polish up and tweak the experience accounts or make sure that your numbers are in line, and we'll play test for math and things. But as a writer, you have to still give us good mechanics that we can then expound off of, and they should be flavorful. You don't want to just give me stat blocks of rats that are just, rats with a, D4 hit points and they have a bite attack is like boring. Rats that, have like a D4 hit points and, well, their attack is listed as chew your face off is way more fun. You can have mechanics writing is really where your like thesaurus and like your Google like search history of like, how can you make this one word? because you have like 1 or 2 words to either be humorous, funny, epic. And so mechanics writing is really just about that pure punch of rat with chainsaw. Like you
Yep.
do something to make it stand out because you don't have the word space. And so the dangers of them is novel writing. It is a significant amount of work for one person, right? It's 150,000 words. You're cranking through it. It's all in your head, and then it's all going to get shredded. We'll talk about editing later. Fluff writing, you get to work with other people. You get to have that fun where we bounce around, but you just got to make sure you're consistently and cool. And then mechanics writing, pray to RND Jesus that your playtest group is very, very strong. And because when you publish or write mechanics writing, and players, specifically players, storytellers, you're okay. Monster stat blocks, we give the pass on and whatnot. But if you publish bad player content, that's it. The entire book could be a brilliant book, but if the classes in the first 10 pages of the book are broken, or just not formatted right, or you missed a colon in a spot, oh man, that's it. Your entire studio is trash. Let's go to the internet and complain. So that's my take on all three, and I do love it because with Prayers of the Past, I actually got to rely on all three. I brought in some novel writing elements into The Crow, where I actually got to put in quotes, some world building, some actual here's a chapter, just a prelude chapter written not for the players, just for the storyteller. And that also, they really loved it when I turned it in, because it meant that even people at the production house and the film studio who aren't gamers loved it. They were able to read it and be like, oh crap, this is a really badass world. So there's reasons to use all three at times.
I think one of the best pieces of advice that I got with the difference between novel writing and fluff writing is that fluff writing, when you're writing fluff for RPGs, every single sentence should be able to serve as a story hook in some way for your characters to be able to take it and run with it. I feel like when you approach writing that way, not only are you using active voice then, because it gets rid of that whole past tense problem, you are able to condense the action down into stuff that is still visually in your head appealing when you read it and interesting, but it also serves the story and kind of makes it easier for both the storyteller and the players to be able to interact with that then. When you get to the novel writing aspect, and I'm not even sure if that's just the right terminology, but there's a lot of filler conversation and stuff that happens that doesn't happen in the fluff writing for RPGs.
Well, yeah, because we get to have character development by having two characters argue with each other in the
Yeah.
scene. We're painting a picture that you typically don't get to do because it's actually role played and acted out in an RPG. My favorite fluff writing that ties exactly to what you just said, Crystal, is in an. I know I do this, but I wish more RPGs did it. When you have item stat blocks or monster stat blocks,
Yep.
those little italic quotes
Yep.
about them and things like that could serve to be wait a minute, that's a fun Easter egg or a cool idea.
Yep. I loved the quotes that were used in the revised VTM, because when you look them up, a lot of times they were either music or the person that they were quoting served some sort of background information within what was happening in that chapter, and it was really kind of cool to figure out that Easter egg.
With the fluff thing, one of the things that I try to do, and I know, and some games have done this quite well, Solemn Veil has done it quite well, is when they write their stories, they purposely leave bits out.
Yep.
So one of the wonderful things about exploring the village of Solemn Vale in that wonderfully weird 1970s British folk horror is the point where the scenario is not written and you are just said, Well, the next thing's going to happen in about 6 hours' time. You've got a village, go explore, go meet the people. And there's nothing, all you've got is this kind of world that exists, and you've got a vague idea of what it's going to be like. But then the fluff is not fully fleshed out, so the players can then go and create the world to some extent themselves. You'll have NPCs written, and there'll be kind of a map of the village, and you'll have a vibe of what it is. But allowing the players to have that ability to craft the world themselves, I find is quite a unique ability within RPG writing. There's some people, and I see this within some of the community content in D&D, where they just go full on and tell you everything and give you the entire world and give you every aspect, and this door looks like this and this window looks like this, and they've got these flowers outside their front door. It's like, do I really need all that information? But going back to something that
The answer is no.
yeah, exactly. You've got a limited word count. Don't fill it up with they've got pansies on their windowsills. You don't need to know that.
Yeah, that's the Chekhov guns in novels. If those pansies on their windowsills need to be mentioned, there better be a plot reason for why those are there.
But yeah, going back to something that you said earlier about when you were talking about The Crow and going, we're not just going to write the movie from 1994. We're not going to do that. We're going to build on the world and use the full world and the comics and stuff. One of the things I tried to do when I wrote for Wrath and Glory was I didn't want it to be a typical Warhammer 40k Marines, Inquisitors fighting chaos story, because that's what it always is. You look at most of the stories out there, it's Imperial guys versus the bad guys. It's Space Marines versus chaos, and it's overdone. 140k, the universe is absolutely massive. There's so many worlds, so many people, there's so many different things you can do. So I went into that going, how can I make this fit within the world but not be what people would expect? And I went, oh, there's a farming world there. Can I set something on the farming world? And they went, yes. And so then I built up this whole idea of a small farming community, being haunted by these ethereal spirits, and managed to get the Dark Elder written into Wrath and Glory earlier than they were intending to because of the way I'd written it. But the way the whole thing plays out, it's a political story. So it's not I need to go find this cult and murder this cult, or there's a space marine running around and killing everybody. There's a lot of politics going on behind the scenes, and then they eventually find out that there is actually an incursion by Dark Elder and stuff. Spoiler alert if you've not played it. But it was kind of, I didn't want to write something that everybody else had written. I wanted to do something that explored the vast world that existed there. And I find that if you go into D&D and stuff, a lot of people fall into the Lords of Waterdeep trap, or they fall into what's the big horror castle one? I want to say Castle
Ravenloft.
Or they fall into Ravenloft, and they just fall into these tropes. And I get bored with it. I don't want to do that. I want to go off and, like, D&Ds are meant to be a world-free system. Meant to be.
I mean, I trust me, I agree very much. All of my major projects that are in D&D are playing with the same thing, and part of the reason is politics and world building and motivation come from us who like stories and novels. As a novel writer, it's almost impossible for me to create a scenario that doesn't have the same kind of elements, right? I would eat up that kind of. Legend of the Five Rings was one of my favorite games.
It's a fantastic game.
Because of the nuance that you could have with just each clan having a purpose and a motivation. And it creates an infinite wellspring of stories. But when you list out the worlds like a dry manuscript in a setting book, even if the writing itself is technically sound and is, fun, there's not a lot to take and build upon as a storyteller or a player, to envision yourself there walking among the streets, to be a part of it. So good fluff writing has a purpose. And but I think that when you did exactly what you did, David, that's totally bringing in that novel writing side of Kick out these templates. We're doing this.
I'll wholly put my hand on my heart here and say I'm very much more about the world building and creating evocative scenes over more of maybe the actual storyline. That tends to get lost at points, and I think I've written mechanics at points. I'm not sure. I don't remember it. If
You
I
wrote
have,
mechanics for me.
have I? Did I?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
and
you
time
wrote a whole
jumpers.
scenario.
Yes, yeah. Okay, maybe I did then. That was. It's not something that I've ever really delved into, so I don't really know too much about it. But yeah, yes, I did for time jumpers, didn't I? So
I will like definitely say, like, after switching to be writing director, one thing I learned is how many freelance TTRPG writers, when it comes time to write mechanics, their like eyes turn into like giant saucers and they get like absolutely petrified
I would love to
because
try it. I would love to try it.
it's and I had Brian Anderson, very, very famous author of the Dragon Veil series, right? He's, does all like super prolific author. He's like, Rick, I want to get into tabletop game RPG writing. Can you show me how to do this stuff? Mechanics can't be that hard. I was like, it requires about, deep knowledge of the actual game system, and years of play, but sure, I'll show you. Try to fill out this template. Brian comes back, yeah, I'm going to stick back to doing novels. If you need anything in the future that's just some, like, storyline stuff, give me a ring.
I see, and that, like, I love mechanics, as Rick knows. I love designing mechanics, and then I love taking those mechanics and making them evocative within the storyline. For instance, like the stuff that I did for the Red Opera. Like, people are talking about stuff that they do with the collectors that I created. I absolutely love seeing what they do with them. It's and that comes from the fact that, like, I actually started, with the exception of First Fable, I started with mechanics writing. That's all Pip System Core Book is the mechanics, the crunchy bits. It is meant for you to be able to put whatever setting you want over it. And I have done that a lot with it. I've created scenarios based off of movies and television series. I've done a whole bunch of other stuff with the mechanics and played around with it.
I mean, Crystal, it's fair to say that you have like a reputation for being able to design mechanic and systems, to the point where I literally come to you and I say, hey, I got this thing, and I could totally say it, Purgatory Poker, the Black Ballad, because we're not under an NDA. Like, design me this system, just go. And the thing is like, right here, for people listening to this podcast, we have three very different, like, people who are all in the industry, who, David, if it was like, okay, cool, design these epic scenes and scenarios and whatnot, he's the writer I would go to for that part. Crystal, boom, I actually do go to Crystal of like, I got this, like, make this impactful game system, so you can find your niche in each of them, and like, you can cross around between all three, but you do find the stuff that you like.
Yeah, having just said that, actually, I've just realised I have written some mechanics. They're not out yet, but it was some character NPC designs for something that is going to come out hopefully next year. Fingers crossed for Vessen, and it was
nice.
Yeah, it was so much fun because I went, how can I bring in these ideas and then how do they work? And it was a very, very different thought process because I wrote the fluff for them and went, now how do these turn into mechanics? So
it is actually fun.
It was
when
quite
you
a
get
fun
into that
thing.
You get into that design thing when you get to describe cool special abilities and character attacks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's got a charm to it.
Yeah, I think Vessel was a good one for it as well because it's very rules light. There's no specific kind of these are the rules and stuff. So it is based upon the imagery of the mechanics. So I found that quite useful.
I like taking the rules and how I approach it is, what can I write that breaks a rule?
I knew you were going to
And that's how I write a lot of mechanics or design a lot of mechanics. It's how can I break a rule and how far do I want to break it? Do I want to just crack it just a little bit, or do I want to blow the whole thing open? And I've written for both of them where I was like, I have no idea if this is balanced or not. I'm going to throw this out there for playtesting and see if it's going to be balanced. If it's not, awesome. I understand. But if it is, I'm taking it and I'm running with it, because when you can figure out that balance, um, mechanics is a lot of fun to play with. All right, we're going to move on to the next part, which is outlining. And this is one that I like. I had to learn how to do as a developer, because when you bring on writers and you don't have an outline, nobody knows what they're doing. And so, like, I've had to stumble through this because I wasn't good at it before when I was just doing the freelancing. I would just kind of write out everything, and I have a process, which is I usually write down just the sections and then I go through and write each section, and that's not outlining technically. So I want to talk about outlining. How useful is it? What is it, and what does it actually look like in application? Because it can look different for different people, and obviously everyone's going to have their own way to outline. But like, what's the bare basics that you need?
As someone who hasn't worked on any kind of like major projects with multiple writers, I've not really dealt in depth with outlining, other than maybe the stuff that I've done with you, Crystal, for Pip, where you've kind of gone, yeah, you're writing the scenario or you're writing this bit, and that's as much as you kind of really gave us. You gave us like the title of the book and kind of the theme of the book, but then you kind of went, well, go write some mechanics for this, go write the scenario for this, and left it at
Yep.
that.
So my approach to outlining is I like to give the idea behind it and then allow writers to fill in everything. I don't like to spoon feed. I feel like if I do that, I will just get exactly what I would have written, and that's not what I want. I want writers to be challenged and come up with cool stuff that I may not have thought of.
With the Soulbound thing that I did as well, all they told us was write something within this realm or this city within the realm, and that was as much as an outline as we got. And then said go write the scenario for this. The Kickstarter that I just did, I kind of roughly because I had to pitch it to the company. I roughly outlined it again just by putting up, well, it's going to be this number of chapters. Each chapter is going to be based upon a different form of divination, and then there'll be a little bit at the bottom of it which will describe how to use them in the game. That was my outline. There was nothing written. It was just chapter headings and the breakdown of the chapters. So that's about as much as my experience with outlining goes. If I'm writing something for community content, I tend to do what I call a first splurge, where I just write. I don't outline anything. I just put words on a page, and it suddenly goes from like two words to 10,000 words very, very quickly, and makes no sense whatsoever. And so I should probably learn to outline better, because then I come back and read it and edit and go, what the hell have I written? But that's
this section of the podcast could be called the Rick's writer horror moment, as I look in shock at the answers that both of you have given.
Wait! I finally figured out something that's horrific for you.
Yes. So okay.
Don't plan.
Outlines are massive for me. So when you write your first novel, you should even still have an outline. When you're on your third novel, that outline looks like it does for mine, which is a entire Excel spreadsheet with every single chapter and what's going to happen in that chapter, how many word counts that chapter is, the starting quote for that chapter, which characters and scenes are involved in that chapter, which other chapters from other books that references. And it will take me about a month and a half to 2 months to make that outline. When that outline is done, I've written the book. I don't sit down to write the book at this point. I just go reference my outline and I just fill in the flowery words. Outlines for me are the actual creation process, and it doesn't matter what I'm writing. When I have a project where I have 23 writers and I have to put together an outline for them, the book is, when I do the outline, every plot beat, everything, like I know what's going to be there. I'll give the writers wiggle room, and I'll say this is what's going to happen in your chapter. You have to bring an encounter or a scenario or something to bring this part to life, but all of the elements surrounding that contained thing are outlined. And I mean down to almost a T. Here's your major characters, here's what they look like, here's their, you know, their Bible parts, here's the plot beats, this is where this section of the book is going to have this. So I could look at a spreadsheet and I know exactly what stage everything is at, and I could have a meeting with each individual person. And I could have, if I had a 20 chapter book with my outlines, I could have 20 writers all work on 20 chapters at the same time. And at the end of it, it would still be a coherent book that just needed a final stitch thread. I really do big outlines, and a great method for people just getting started in outlines is called the snowball method. You write down your book in 15 words of what the synopsis of it is. You take those 15 words and you describe it out into 5 sentences, right, as a overall thing, which also serves as a great pitch or a tagline for the back of the book later on. And then you take those 5 sentences and you turn each of those 5 sentences into your further outline points, and then you go into each of those and fill them out. Then you can make a spreadsheet on the side and have a character. And I know this seems like a lot of work, but when you are really starting to do this for a career and you're starting to go to like those next stages, um, you once you realize that you're not outlining your book so that you can write your book, you're actually writing your book in an outline format so you can then actually produce the book. And you need all of those components in there. You can come up with treatments, pitch lines, docs, character descriptions, commission artwork. Your outline can serve as a fundamental breach of every aspect of TTRPG and novel game creation. You know, no artist wants to necessarily read an entire chapter, but if I have my outlines actually written up and done, I can commission art orders at the same time that my writers are going through chapters just by my outline descriptive briefs. And so, yes, 2 outlines. And there is there is a lot of reasons. Your marketing copy, oh, there's so much can be built off of your outlines, but once your outline's done, your book is done. You just need to put in the time to type in the pretty words. But that creative part, it's already done.
See, and that's actually kind of why I wanted to bring you on, not specifically for the outlines, but for like your whole perspective, because you do come from novel writing primarily. And so like I have seen your outlines and I was like, how in the world do you function? I love spreadsheets, but oh my goodness. And so hearing reason why, where you come from, how you do it, I feel like, because like I said, both David and I have had instances where we don't have an outline, or like I have an outline and I have basic outlines, but like I give a lot more freedom, but that's because of the perspective and the scale too. I don't have a huge scale like you do. Yeah, like just seeing and experiencing different types of novel or not novel RPG outlining, I feel is also useful, because if you come from somebody who has an extensive outline and then you go to like, just write us whatever in the city, that is very jarring.
Yeah. I imagine like having those wonderful spreadsheets that you've just mentioned, and I love a good spreadsheet, but that sound terrifies me the way you've just described it. But I imagine for like one of these large, full-on scenario books that you'd get, so Ravenloft and stuff like that, I imagine having that kind of plan would be incredibly useful, because it can be done quickly. Once you pass it out to the writers, it's done very, very quickly, and the story's all coherent and things. Whereas if you didn't have that and you just said your chapter's on this, go write it, you'd have 20 writers writing 20 different things that you'd then have to come back to and go, well, that's a story, possibly.
So there's another industry that this is actually super relevant in, and a fun side story is me and Melinda Snodgrass, who wrote Star Trek Next Generation, and is a screenwriter for many like Hollywood things, right? And we were on a panel together, and both of us were talking about writing process at different ends of the panel. Melinda and I do not come from the same generation, right? She could be my grandmother, but she's still a very prolific and amazing writer. But when we were talking about our writing processes from two completely different industries, professional screenwriter, game dude who writes sarcastic apocalyptic stuff, our methods, and there were some indie authors like in the middle, both Melinda and I had the exact same writing process. And even after that panel, we realized, we're like, hey, she was like, we're siblings just from a different generation. We will even go do our outline and then purposely go for a walk or a run or go work out, because after you write a segment of your outline, you get to go have that shower, that away time from the computer, and ideas can percolate about what comes next while it's in your brain. But that she talked about it on a screenwriter's side, when you have writing rooms for just filled with people, um, the project director or the writing director or the person responsible for those outlines, you can collaborate. If you can have 5 writers, 20 writers in a room all building the outline together. It doesn't have to be a solo project. But you're building your Bible so that you all know what you're going to be working on together.
It's a bit of similar kind of within academic writing. Within sciences, I know at least within the sciences that I work in, and I know within some of the other sciences as well, you have multiple authors on a paper. So you have your first author, who is generally the one who's done most of the work, and then you have a list of co-authors. And the way when I write on papers, I will write a section, it'll be planned out. Papers generally follow a very, very similar pattern. You have your introduction, your methods, your results, your conclusions, and the discussion section. It's generally done like that, but it has to be a flowing story. So even though it's very academic and the language can be very, very dry, you're still trying to tell a story throughout of this. So I'll write one section and go, right, okay, that's fine. That makes sense. I'll then take that break. I'll go off and go for a walk, and I'll let the next ideas of the flow of the results from the story that we're trying to tell come to me. And then I'll come back and write that, and then it'll go to the co-authors, and they'll go, yes, this makes sense, or this doesn't make sense, and we'll work together within the outline that the journals want us to write in, because journals are the be all and end all of science, apparently. Long arguments we can have about that one, but it's kind of that where I do follow an outline because we have to, but there are some similarities that I can see between the styles there. It's just the words are less fun and probably longer and more complicated.
I don't know. I know some brilliant the scientists at the Museum of Science and Industry. They have a way of turning science into snark, and I love them.
But they're paid for outreach.
Yes, that's true.
When I do my outreach, I do get a bit British humor, I feel, on it.
I will say, from a perspective of like writing and stuff like that, like working within outlines like Rick has, I did have a lot of creative freedom. I had a ton more than what you might think you might have. It's just a matter of being able to work within that goal and knowing what the end result is going to be, and from there knowing what parameters you have. You have a bigger box than what you think, and so having a very detailed outline is not necessarily not like detrimental to the creative process.
Yeah, a great example of what that looks like is just, I will go to Crystal and say, I have this chapter 3, the characters are going to walk into this room at this point, there's this big political thing that needs to happen, go nuts. And like at that point, she gets to have fun within that box, and she knows where the beginning and the end is at. And that's the important part. You're providing this next person. This is where you're bringing it to a close, so the next person can go forward.
Yep. As long as I know what the end point is, and then I can lead into where the next writer that picks up that next portion, where it's not going to be a jarring voice change, which is hard to develop through.
That's editors.
Yeah, and actually we're going to talk through that. Actually, let's go to the next point, which is redlines / developer notes and editing. So I know, like, Rick has a slightly different process than myself when it comes to being the developer or the project head. So with the PIP system, I do a first draft, and then I do what's called redlining or developer notes. And those are the notes that I give to the writers as to what I want them to do for direction-wise. And then from there, they have a rewrite session where they can fix the stuff that I've asked them to. I do some minor editing. I am not an editor, but I read through everything, and if it's not working or if something can work better, I usually give them editing notes. I always do spelling and punctuation and stuff like that.
A question on this one, then.
Yeah.
You've never given me red lines.
I have.
I didn't get any on the last one. I didn't see anything. I sent it through to you, and then it appeared in the book.
David, that's because you have the golden touch at the keyboard.
I really don't. Right? I have massive dyslexia.
It's
probably really horrendous.
David, don't you remember? That was when you started doing your research project, and you're like, I just don't have time.
Oh, okay, that might be it. Okay.
And so I just did them for you. I was like, yeah, no problem. I got you. Oh yeah, you were moving that time. It was something that was happening in your actual life where.
Oh no, yes, I remember. Yes, you did offer, and I went, yeah, I'm not going to have time to do this. Okay.
Yep. And so I just did them for you. So
much appreciated.
So where's our process differ here? Because that's exactly where I have.
So I think it's more of like what we call it than anything else. Because after I get the second one done, then I send it off to an editor. Or I do development and then I send it off to an editor. I think it's more of
mine come from the literary terms. So
yeah.
So for me, it's writer does draft or I do a draft. I will send it off to the developmental editor, right? And that's a person whose job is to make your story be the best version of your story that they can be, and they can hurt. Developmental editing is rough. It's actually, if it takes me 3 months to draft a novel, it could take me 8 months to do dev edits. It's developmental editing can be hard. But then writer comes back and they revise it and they have their writing session just like that. And then they turn it back in. Some projects I will have 2 rounds of dev editing. Sometimes for books, I'll have 2 rounds of especially as you're getting later in a series where it becomes more complex. A second pass is always a good check, but it's lighter. It's nowhere near as intense. And then I'll go to a copy editor for specifically the arcane wizardry of the Chicago Manual of Style and, various who wants to argue over commas and semicolons. On my end as a writer, I will admit the dirty truth that when I get copy edit backs, I just right click accept all. It takes me 10 minutes to do my copy editing. I am not going to argue over where a word goes.
I have the same editor for Pip that I've had for the entirety of that whole thing. I trust that editor. I know that editor. We have had very many deep discussions about things. I also just accept all because I know that she knows what she's talking about. She knows Pip. She knows what I'm looking for, even if she doesn't have the outline in hand or anything like that. She knows exactly what I look for in Pip. I just accept all. And that's because I trust her. So yeah, I kind of do the same. I've had it where she and I were in the same document and she's going through editing stuff and I'm just accepting it as she's doing it.
It's like,
I've done
listen,
that too.
you don't even need to track changes. Just go ahead and make them. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Just save the time, because I'm not gonna pay attention. Like, I'll like do this thing. It did get me in trouble in my book though, because the copy editor changed the name of a street that I like changed the address of a place, and my friend in Chicago recognized that street and was like, that building's
Wait,
not there.
what? Oh,
Uh,
now I want to know.
uh,
You can tell me
uh,
after if you want.
Yes, but so there is there was one where that accept all did bite me, and and then after that we'll do proof stage, which is after layout. You'll go through the PDF
Yep,
and you'll do a
we have
final
that too.
edit for proof or print proof or whatever the element would be. And then print proof is when you physically get the book.
Yep.
You're supposed to take another pass through it to make sure that everything else also checked. So really the painful one for most people is developmental editors.
Yep.
And even there hasn't been a single project that I've been on where developmental editors clashing with writers can always be rough, right? It is always it's just hard. But Stephen King has the best advice for it. Your editor is right 100% of the time. I may not listen, or you may not listen to your editor 100% of the time. I may not listen to my editor 100% of the time. Your editor's still right 100% of the time. And the truth is, though, when you are a writer and a creator of content and you are going through dev editing, the only way to make sure you can stand your ground, even if you have to have an adversarial approach, is to understand and have pride in your work or know your core idea. Yep. And if an editor is suggesting that something gets cut or changed, even if they left a comment that you don't agree with or you don't understand it or you think that that's there, you have to remember they're reading it from their point of view. And if they think that something is weak and needs to get cut or doesn't make sense, it's because you didn't do a good enough job explaining and setting up why that is an important thing.
Yep.
And so you have to kind of read between the lines of your editor. And there are times, though, I have had to fire a dev editor off a project because their feedback just was not helpful and it was not constructive. And so, but you also have to know as a creator, here is what I'm trying to do. And not everybody is a good fit for that editing stage.
And like, so my approach to dev editing is that I always try to look at the overall voice and like how that's going to fit in the bigger picture. And so like when I approach getting dev edits back, I also try to be like, well, my voice isn't fitting what they're wanting. So it's not and I will say like 90% of the time, it's not they're attacking me personally or my writing personally. It is they are trying to get my voice to align with everything else in the bigger project and the bigger picture. And I only have that small little portion. And so I approach dev editing in that way too, because I don't expect my writers to know every single in and out of PIP. That's my job. They are focusing on their little part of that system. And that's it. So they don't know that we possibly had that power written three articles ago for PIP, and it's the exact same wording and the exact same mechanics, just a different title. That's my job. So I need to let them know, hey, you need to adjust this. It's exactly the same as this other thing, just with a different title. Or, you know, this isn't working. I need you to rewrite this. So yeah, like it's really hard not to take it personally. Usually when I get dev edits back and I know that they're rough, I will read through every single one of them and then give myself a day or two to just kind of process through all of the feelings and go through the stages of grief and imposter syndrome that always happens every single time. It doesn't matter how good my red lines come back to me. I always have that I don't belong here, and I know that, so I plan for it, and then I start working on my making my writing better and matching up with what it needs to be. Let's move on, because like the whole thing, a lot of it has to deal with just dealing with imposter syndrome. To be honest, like redlines are tough. As Rick said, I actually do appreciate when people stand their ground for things that they are actually really passionate about when it comes to that particular writing. If I don't see it though, one, I want the author or the writer to let me know that that is something that they want to stay in there, and how can we keep it in there? Because it's pushback, but it's pushback in a way that if the author is truly passionate about it, it does belong in there. So let's figure it out. And as just a piece of advice, if a developer is abusive to you in the comments and starts making commentary about other things that is not the writing specifically, that is when you need to have a conversation with somebody else in the company, for moderator or anything like that. Don't take that abuse. Like,
Yep,
that's
exactly.
yeah,
Like
that's not cool.
let your writing director know. Like I swear, if I ever had, like anybody, if you ever get told that somebody, if you're this is hard to say because this one's a bit of drama related, but if anybody ever says your writing is weak in dev notes, that is not constructive criticism in
Nope.
any capacity. And right away, that's like your writing director should be on that person. Of like, no.
Yep.
And everybody was brought onto the project for something. But if you're a writer and you have that idea, yeah, let us know. Push back. Like, you can reject an editorial change,
Yep.
because then it's a dialogue conversation. Hey,
Yep.
here's why I think this is cool. And then we go, okay, how do we work that in?
Okay, so moving on to our next portion, I want to talk a little bit about writer's block. Because I feel like a lot of people also suffer from this, especially like if you're brand new and you're like, I have writer's block, I have no idea where to start. I have personally, I do experience this, and I don't call it writer's block, I call it writer's avoidance, because that is exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to avoid the writing. And so and that's like, that's a personal thing for me. Like, I have so many ideas, and I know I do, so I know it's not an idea thing. It is definitely I'm trying to avoid the work. So what is the most prevalent thing on my mind, and I need to get that done, and then I can focus on the writing. And it's usually cleaning, so you'll know when I have a deadline, because my apartment will be spotless, and everything will be organized. And yeah, so like my husband is like, oh, you have a deadline coming up, don't you? I'm like, oh yeah, why? He's like, because you just reorganized your entire closet. Yeah, it tracks. So I've kind of reframed it in that way, because that's how my brain works. But what about you both of you? How, like, writer's block is a thing, but how do you approach it? How do you rectify it?
I'm super fast on this one because I don't have much to say, because I don't have writer's block. I treat my writing like a job, and I train myself to just sit on down every day and do something every single day for it. And creatively, early on in my career, I picked up a very compelling trick that has prevented me from ever having writer's block. The start of my idea is the end of whatever I'm writing. And since I always know where the end is at, I'm always writing to that goal. I'm not sitting at a blank piece of paper of I'm going to write a novel. I don't know what this novel is about. I could tell you the ending of every single book I have in my entire 7th Age series. Like down to a T. And it has not changed for 5 years. And they're out there. They're like, I'm still working on them every, week or so. I push that boundary a little further. It's just time for me. But I don't have writer's block, and it's never been a thing, because it every time I sit down, every time I take on a project that I'm going to write, I want to work on it, and I already know where it ends. And so the rest of it is just training your time of every day I do something related with my writing life. Period. whether it be a building an outline, I don't track word counts per day or things like that. Just something gets done every day with that capacity, and it's just part of my routine. Oh yeah, that's absolutely real. And I mean, I got my day job too. You need that time, and so that's where we're on a podcast right now, doing this thing and doing this recording. We're not writing, but this is still a writing thing. It's actually
Yes.
helping with the other part of writing, which we don't ever do, marketing. um,
Yep. I got audiobooks. I've started doing audiobooks more often than because of the whole screen time thing. So
yes.
audiobooks have been fantastic because I can get research in while I'm doing housework or
Oh,
driving.
oh shit! I just realized one of the biggest ways I got over writing avoidance. I deleted League of Legends off my computer.
I I Diablo 3 for me. That
I
was that was
yeah.
my big one.
I I
Yep.
I, I yeah. I'm done. I don't game on the computer at all anymore. I specifically save my role playing games and my gaming for an RPG that has a beginning, a middle, and an end after I complete a project as a personal reward.
So we talked a little bit about pitches, and this is like where I've actually personally struggled because usually I have people coming to me going, I want you to write this. And which is awesome. I love that people think of me when they're coming up with a project and they're like, I want Crystal to write this part because I know she's going to be awesome at it. But then like people are like, oh well yeah, sure, write up a pitch. And I'm like, what? Um, and so that had been a huge struggle for me, and kind of still is, because I always like to be able to know like how to pitch and what parts I need to include in the pitch. So I want to talk about this because I know both of you have written pitches before for very different companies and very different reasons. So like, how do you both approach this? This is kind of a self-serving one for me, but I figure everyone else is going to benefit from this too because I'm always still learning. Even if I have written on a whole bunch of projects, I'm still learning stuff about this industry. So
So I do have a lot of pitch. I have three pitches in right now. One of them is a full PowerPoint presentation treatment. We passed the North American branch. We actually have to get it translated to Japanese and get shipped overseas to like pay a broker to go hand that thing delivered and give a presentation out in Japan. I have That's actually one of the things I'll be doing later December is literally working with Joseph Asfahani to translate this pitch for an RPG game, because we're actually going to try to take a swing of the fences and go for a major anime title.
nice,
But we passed the North American branch. We just have to go to the next stage now. But my initial pitch was very much just a finding the right person to give the pitch to, and that did involve me going to do a lot of research, figure out who's the right person, asking if it's okay for me to turn in a pitch because you don't want to send in
hmm
a blind pitch. And then we call them treatment documents. And a treatment is about a one-page synopsis, high-level overview, filled with punch. This thing is not dry. You want your treatment document to be badass. Go get a copy editor and pay them to edit your treatment. Like, never send a treatment off to anybody if you have not had a professional editor go through it. Otherwise, you will, especially if you're doing this for like, I want to do this thing. Pay the $200 to have a copy editor go through your treatment, but get your treatment done. If anybody needs help with writing a treatment, email me. My contact information is on my website, which I'll talk about at the end of the podcast. I have sample treatments available. I can walk people through the process. I learned a lot of this from writing for Geek and Sundry and Nerdist. A good way to learn how to write pitches as well is to do blog writing or press writing, because those taglines that you come up with, those 15 words, those hooks, those elements that you're doing are very strong ways to sell something in a quick, like if you have a tweet and a tagline, writing blog posts or doing press writing of covering other people's work is a good way to train your ability to pitch. And you can actually watch and gamify your pitch ability in real time by watching how many clicks you get on your articles based off the tagline and the cover image alone, because you're really just selling people and you're trying to get people's attention with just this one tiny little element. And so pitch writing is very important for an author, especially when you're promoting your own work, because your primary sales is driven by revenue and getting people to read your work out there. Crystal has heard my pitch in person. She knows I'm a very strong in-person pitcher. That's why I do a lot of conventions, because I have just this. I'm very
That's
passionate
actually
about.
how we first met.
Yeah, I'm very passionate about my novels, and I kind of like nerd out, and I will like smile about them, but I will give a very like awesome pitch about my novels, and I have to work on my internet pitching for it. But that's like you have to take your marketing time to go do that. But I have treatments for it, and it did work. That's how I got an audiobook. That's how I got optioned. Which will probably never go anywhere, but just even getting an option is still nice. And you really with the Crow, I blind pitched. I was not recruited to write the Crow. I saw that the studio had it. I reached out. I contacted them. I had some back and forth emails with them. They weren't familiar with my work. I gave a very awesome, nice bio of here's what I've done. Here's some of the awards that I've written. Here's some of the works that I've published. And I said, can I just please submit you a treatment? I have a killer idea for this. And they agreed to let me submit a treatment. And I wrote up an entire treatment for Prayers of the Past, and I sent it to them, and they loved it. And that's how that process got started. And then that goes back into an earlier chapter, because they sent back a contract, and even though I was pitching them, I still negotiated my contract. And yeah, pitching is a skill set. You can take classes on it, you can work at it, you can hone it. It is sort of the transition after you've finished something and you're done with it and you're looking to go get more work. The learning how to do pitches, treatments, go develop, chase bigger IPs, that is sort of a thing that kind of comes afterwards. You don't start off as a strong pitcher. It's a dedicated thing you have to work towards.
And I do want to preface this by saying that most companies do not want unsolicited pitches.
That's why you have to ask first.
Yes, ask first. A lot of companies will only take pitches from writers who they have contracted with before. So you do have to kind of go into it with the awareness of, just because you have a good idea does not necessarily mean that a company is going to either want to hear it or have the ability to hear it at that moment. And that is because there are a lot of wheels going on and a lot of things that are going on within a company that are not announced. And as good as we think our ideas are, a lot of times they're built off of things that other people have also noticed within writing, especially for things like RPG lines, where they leave a lot of stuff open for interpretation. They have a lot of interesting things that they don't expand upon. And so there could be products that are coming down the line that have not been announced that are almost word for word your pitch. And then that puts the company in a very bad position of, in the future when it is released, are they going to be accused of stealing that pitch?
Oh yes,
okay.
Yeah, you can never attach your manuscript, your idea, anything. I can't even open the email if there's a document attached and you want to pitch me your game or something like I can't even look at it.
Yep. Yes. So, like, do not do that. Do not be the writer to do that, because that is a very quick way to not be asked to work on any projects with that company because of the fear of the legal repercussions behind of, well, they pitched this to us and we have this book coming out and it is almost exactly word for word the same pitch that we did because it's such a popular area, or whatever the case may be. So please, as a writer, as a freelancer, be mindful of how you are pitching things. Always, never do anything unsolicited. Always ask first. Um, uh, and start with the companies that you have worked with if you have that ability, because those companies are going to be the ones they're going to know your work, and they're going to know how strong of a writer you are, and know where you are best fit within the company and the projects. So okay, so any other things on pitches or anything else?
No, pitching's also really good though to get people to play in your own tabletop games. If we're short on players,
Yeah.
learning how to sell your game of why they should play your campaign, always
Yeah,
handy.
that's legit. All right, so I always like to close with some advice they have, or some of the biggest takeaway that they have from this discussion, or the biggest piece of advice that you have in this specific topic. So who would like to go around first? Rick?
All right, so I mean, my big shock was still definitely the outline thing, but also actually, Crystal, your actual thing just now on pitches, where you just mentioned about how companies couldn't open up documents and there's legal ramifications and how to go about that in the industry with industry etiquette. I actually forgot about that myself. I mean, I still go ask for how to do pitches, but like that's actually my takeaway of like I'm gonna remember. I was like, oh yeah, got to do this way, because I don't commit that sin, but at the same time I do forget about it. I have a lot of people right now sending me pitches,
Yep.
and I have to be very careful about that. And I have to formalize my own studio's submission process for pitches now while we're getting started. And so that is a huge takeaway for me because now I'm on the other side of that fence.
Well, now I know what you're doing after the podcast.
Yes.
All right, David?
So my takeaway from this episode and kind of what I've picked up, I suppose, what I've learned is the bit on pitching and pitching to companies, as it's something that I've never really had to do. I seem to have been in that lucky situation where things just seem to have worked out. But yeah, the idea of first asking if they're open for the pitch, making sure that they're willing to accept the pitch rather than just going, here's a pitch, here, what do you think of my idea? Is it cool? Are you interested? So asking, are you open for pitches? Are you open and willing to hear my idea? And then if they say yes, then obviously that's great, and you can go off and then do an outline of your pitch, see if it's something that they can work with, and then if they do say no, then or they don't respond, then well, don't take that to heart, I suppose. They're not going to obviously pick up on every pitch. Some pitches they may already, as we've said, they may already be working on with other things, and obviously then there's the legal ramifications that may come from that. Don't be disheartened if you don't hear from them. Companies can get hundreds of thousands of pitches, I would guess. Well, not hundreds of thousands, that would be insane. But they could get hundreds of pitches for their lines, and I'm sure that does happen. And well, there are lots of writers out there. There are lots of freelancers out there who are looking for work. So just keep trying on that one. But yeah, I think learning how to pitch properly is kind of what I've taken out of this.
Yeah. Okay. And I think my biggest takeaway is the steps for the outlining and like how to actually effectively use it, because that has been a struggle for me personally. Because again, I've outlined how like I started out in the industry with, and that's what I knew. And going into it now, I'm like, okay, so how can I adjust things to be a little bit more cohesive so that it's easier for writers to find voice and all of that stuff for bigger projects? Because Pip Primer is a small project, so it's a very small scale. I can kind of get away with stuff, but when I get into larger projects, how can I take that and expand it into something that is more manageable for me? And I love spreadsheets. I adore spreadsheets. I use spreadsheets as an educator to track data and everything like that. And I have everything all fill everything all out and connect everything and link and all of that stuff. So I know how to use them, and now it's applying that knowledge to the actual writing process. So, and the fact that it horrifies Rick that I don't do that. So we are going to be wrapping up this podcast series, this episode. First off, I am going to have everybody kind of give their socials, where you can find them, projects where you can buy your stuff, and then I will close out with the Darker Days radio stuff. So who wants to go first?
In regards to where you can find me, I am on social media. I have a Twitter, at the Drunken Store 1. I occasionally appear on the Twitter. I'm in the Darker Days Radio Discord, which will be linked in the show notes. I have my own podcast where I tell gothic horror stories at the moment. I delve into folklore and history from around the world and things. And that's the Drunken Storytellers podcast. You can find that on all good podcast places. It's a bit random. Sometimes it's long, sometimes it's short. Sometimes it's scary, sometimes I talk crap. So go check that out as well. You can find my works over on DriveThruRPG. Look for David Whitworth, or go through the Darker Days Radio, and you'll see some of my stuff there that I've done with Crystal and things. And the Hive Mind, not Hive Mind Games, and the Eye to the Void, which is a guide to real-world divination in tabletops and how to use it as inspiration for tabletop RPGs. That will be published by Hive Mind Games, and it will also be on DriveThruRPG. There will be a PDF, softback, and a hardback version of that. So that is me. Thank you very much.
So you can find all of my stuff at www.rickheinzwrites.com. And all of my stuff is there. My links, socials, Twitters, everywhere you go. I'm on TikTok. You can tell when I'm in the middle of a project, because when I'm between projects, I will post more on things. But when I'm like knee deep in them, I'm this. My novels are called the Seventh Age series, Seventh Age Dawn and Dystopia. If you like sarcastic fiction about the end of the world, and what happens when the anarchists steal magic from the Illuminati, these Masons, and all these secret societies, and give it to everybody, take a look. The second book is all about Magic Returns, and companies brand it, because if Amazon would grind up a unicorn and sell it to you, they totally would. I freaking love it. Working on book 3 right now. But also Storytellers Forge Studios. We are officially opening up our studio. Our first major project is going to go to Kickstarter at the end of February, beginning of March, called The Black Ballad. An epic tale of cleric focused an epic tale about what to do after you've TPK'd your party. A cleric-focused adventure set in the afterlife, where your party will determine the fate of a resurrection through the entire world, for better or worse. And this massive, sprawling, epic Tier 4 campaign. And it's going to be awesome. We got like soundtracks, all kinds of like crazy elements going into it. It's like the Red Opera, just better. And I know that it's coming along great, but if this project works, we'll have a whole studio. And so our website for Storytellers Forge will go up in January and things like that. We're knee deep in production right now.
All right. And my personal social medias is you can find my website at thegeekypanda.com. And that is where you will find a list of all of my published materials, both on DriveThruRPG and off. You can also find me on all the social medias, including TikTok, but I mostly do videos of my cat. Right now, I haven't quite figured out what I want to do with TikTok. That's something I'm still trying to figure out. But you can find all of my social medias at Body and Soul 152. And then in closing, so this series is hosted by Darker Days Radio. So you can find social media for Darker Days Radio at darkerdaysradio@gmail.com. Please email us. If you have questions about the podcast, specifically about the series, you can feel free to email or find us on our Discord. Facebook.com/darkerdaysradio, at Darker Days Radio for all other social medias, Instagram, Tumblr, on Tabletop, YouTube, Twitch, and our Discord, which all three of us are in. So if you have questions, we also do have a mentorship channel where you can ask questions about it there. I want to thank both of you for coming on and dumping all of this knowledge about the writing process and sharing your experiences and your inner workings and everything like that. You will be able to find all links and everything like that in the show notes, as well as the outline for what we discussed on this podcast. So thank you and have a good night.